Oh, this is really kind of blew my mind at the end of chapter 4.
At the end of chapter 4, okay.
Um, he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
also spoke of trees from the cedar of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out the walls. He also spoke of animals, of birds, of creeping things, of
Yeah.
fish. Could he talk to the animals?
No, no, whoa. Of. He spoke of.
Okay.
He's
Well,
talking about the creation. He's not Dr. Doolittle.
yeah, yeah.
He's talking
Okay.
about the
That's
creation.
right.
So
But
he's
even still,
yeah, he's not that wise. He's not. No, he's yeah, and so you see it a little bit in the, in the Proverbs.
right.
You see it in the Song of Solomon,
Yeah.
right? In very, uh, they're very in tune with nature.
Okay.
You might even call Solomon like he's a natural philosopher.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Luther, the way that Martin Luther talks about Adam before the fall, is the great natural philosopher.
Because he asked a question.
Well, because he kind of knows everything that needs to be known about the creation in order to make it
Yeah.
operate,
Okay. Yeah.
right? And so to kind of as the image of God in the creation, he has this sense. Adam and Eve, it's almost like they've got this sense of the world around them, even
Yeah.
if they don't know good and evil,
Right.
that whole thing. But they've got this sense of the world around them. So human beings, as people who are ruling over the creation and caring for the creation, you kind of have this sense that maybe they're, as Luther said, they're the first natural philosophers,
Right.
And so you kind of see this with Solomon too, is he's got this sense, he's prayed for wisdom,
Yeah.
and God has given it to him, and now he's very in touch with the creation,
Okay.
and I think and so his imagery is very creation heavy. The temple that he builds, of course, it's through the direction of God.
Right.
But you notice even with the instructions for the tabernacle and for the temple, the imagery is plants and animals and cherubim. So
Yeah.
so you've got which are all actually, those all three things fit in the same category. Plants, I mean they're distinct from each other, but plants, animals, and cherubim, who are heavenly creatures, they are all part of the creation.
Right.
So they're in some sense we categorize them differently because they're very different from each other, but they fall under the category of creation.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? And so he's got a sense of kind of all of this stuff. And so he talks about this. And I think this is again, you see it in Ecclesiastes too. And I think that this kind of shows us that human beings, we should have a sense of the world around us.
Yeah.
It's not something that we escape. We should have a sense of, we should be kind of earthy. I know that
right.
there's trends in society, and that's one of the trends, right
Right.
now. But I think there is a sense of this, that you see that we should be connected to the world around us, because human beings have been taken from the world. We're created, the Hebrew word for ground is Adamah.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this when we did Genesis. It was Adamah, and the word for human is Adam. Okay,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
we are dust, and to dust we will return.
Right.
And so we have this special relationship with the world around us, which Solomon, I think, seems to be a
Yeah.
thing for him, right?
Yeah, right.
So, yep. All right. Well,
Okay, good.
what else do you have here?
Moving on to chapter 5.
Okay.
So in verse 9,
Okay.
when they were sending the logs down the river,
Yeah.
I just think of course the Egyptians did this too, but I think it's crazy how this is what you said, it was 1000 BC,
Yeah.
and
Roughly
they
900
knew
something. Yeah.
that you could put logs on rafts and float them down a river.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
nothing for them. Yeah, that's
It's
yeah.
just weird to think about.
Well, I mean, these aren't. You're talking here at this point. We're in the Iron Age.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, they're not
Well,
the
yeah,
Bronze
yeah,
Age
they
anymore.
have-
They're in the
they have
Iron Age.
metal-
They are.
Metal idols and all that things.
Yeah, sometimes I forget how sophisticated
Right.
civilizations have been. I mean, it's crazy. Again, even to go back to, to compare. I mean, first of all, this is nothing compared to Egypt.
Right.
Like
yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, in Egypt it was like it was like before the Bronze Age. I mean, it's so sophisticated from so early on.
Right.
Yeah, this is nothing compared to what they're doing. It is interesting though to see how time affects places and infrastructure affects places.
Yeah.
So like it's interesting. You can see if you're to trace like you can find some take like some Roman rooms like a Roman Forum or something. And Rome is a good example of this because the Roman culture kind of persisted and still persists to this day.
Yeah.
Right? So there is Rome's a really good example of this, whereas Egyptian culture is different. It's gone through a lot of different transformations, and not to say that Roman culture hasn't, but it still has maintained itself in a lot of ways. Okay, so it's a really good, test case or case study or something. Is if you were to take like a Roman ruin in a major city and think about how those buildings were used during the time of, let's say, if they were built during the Republic, fine, or let's say during the Roman Empire, and then as time went on, how they might have been used later on in history, like 100, 200 years later, 300 years later. So let's take a Roman Forum and civic buildings. What happens to a civic building after the Roman government kind of collapses?
It just gets left.
Well, someone's going to use it for something.
Yeah.
It might be a stable.
Yeah.
It might be a place where people are keeping their horses or their
Right.
their oxen or something. It might, but it's the same building.
Yeah.
It's the same beautiful stone building, but it doesn't have the infrastructure to maintain it.
Right.
And so it's just always interesting to me to see how, and then of course over time, because it really doesn't have a use anymore, people might take parts of it. It might undergo different distresses and
Right. I've heard that a lot.
and then becomes a ruin, as we would call it. But there was a time where it was probably being used for a purpose that it wasn't built for,
Right.
in a very unglamorous way, even though it was a very glamorous building to begin with. And so I just kind of always think about this. So like this, with like taking the logs and they're now this is going to be a temple built primarily out of wood,
Right.
where the next one, when they rebuild it, it's going to be out of stone.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, even this building is not the temple in Jerusalem. The first temple wasn't that impressive compared to some of the other stuff that was around.
Okay.
It was overlaid in gold in a lot of places, which is
Right.
very impressive.
Yeah.
It had it had its own beauty to it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't like some very impressive, massive stone
Right.
building that could hold a candle to what was already a ruin in Egypt.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, from 1,000 years prior. Right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, they had this doesn't begin to scratch the surface of what some civilizations, not a lot, but some were actually capable of doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Looking at Egypt, it's kind of just mind blowing.
Egypt, Babylon.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
even Babylon.
and they're building stuff 1,000, 1,500 years later, and it still doesn't. And I think maybe that's not it's not supposed to be that impressive.
Yeah.
Right? It will be now. Herod later on wants to make it look like a Roman building,
Right.
and he will in 900 years.
Yeah.
And that'll be pretty impressive. And so, some of that stuff still stands to today. But at this time, it's a beautiful building. It's going to have incredible gold overlays and statues of like the cherubim and beautiful furniture overlaid with gold and very intricate hangings, wall hangings, various curtains with that have been sewed very beautifully. Okay, incredible textiles.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it really is a cedar wood building.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then you think about it, isn't like the cathedrals in Europe, aren't a lot of those wood?
Well, a lot of
They have,
the
like facades, but the main structure.
no, well, I mean there is wood in them.
Okay.
So like I remember when there was that big fire in Notre Dame,
Yeah.
right in Paris, and they the roof had had wood,
Right.
right, to keep it up. And these massive massive beams
Yeah.
that were like 800 years old,
Right.
and they were still there,
Yeah.
but they caught fire, So yeah, there is going to be wood that's going to be part of the structure,
Right.
but a lot of them are going to be built out of stone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last one,
Okay.
in chapter 15,
Fif-
Solomon had, or
verse 15.
chapter 5, verse 15, yeah.
Yep.
Solomon had 70,000 who carried burdens. What does the carry burdens mean?
Had 70,000 burden bearers. I'm gonna guess those are probably the people that are hauling this stuff in.
Okay.
I don't know. Well, here, let's just I'll read the whole verse here because it's interesting.
Yeah.
This is starting in verse 13. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, remember, this was the prophecy that God told the people of Israel when they wanted a king just to be like everyone else. He said, he's going to force you into labor,
Right.
and you're going to become his slaves.
Yeah.
And he's going to make you do building projects. And they said, we want a king anyway. And this is where it comes true.
Yeah.
Solomon's son, Rehoboam, when we get there, we're going to read how much he messes this up.
Okay.
And how he causes division in Israel because he's going to do it. He wants to do it more.
Right.
And everyone in Israel's going to be like, we're not doing that anymore. We're done. We need to rest. All right. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who carried on the work. Okay, so this was a massive building project.
Yeah.
Okay, now you do see the stone part here. So you have the cedars. At the king's command, they quarried out great, costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. Okay, so you've got like a building that is, it's got stone. It's hard to tell how much stone,
Right.
but at some point then there's a lot of wood in this building.
Yeah.
Whereas in the second temple, it seems to be made out of stone, right? So it's a massive project.
Right.
I mean, I say it, compared to the pyramids,
Right.
but it's still, I shouldn't, I should give, I mean, it is worthy of it is impressive enough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so compared to the pyramids, I don't know,
Yeah.
but it is a massive project,
Right.
And it is an impressive temple, even if it's not like one of the ziggurats of Babylon or again pyramids of Egypt or something,
Right.
But this is a massive project.
Well, even you can tell because David didn't have any time to build it.
Yeah, well, he wasn't allowed to, remember?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you remember God said, "No, you don't build me a house. I'll build you a house. I'll make." And again, that's the dynasty, and then the Jesus reigning forever, right? I do want to go back to one thing because I want to know your thoughts
Okay.
on his wisdom and the display of his wisdom in chapter 3.
With
So you've got God says, whatever you ask, I'll give to you, and he says, so he's remember, he's got the people that are going to the high places and all this stuff, and kind of people are doing whatever they want, and so he prays for wisdom, and God says, okay, I'll give you the wisdom to govern the people, and then I'll also give you all these riches and all this other stuff. Okay, but in verse 16, there is this case that he's got to solve between these two women.
right.
Okay. And there are children involved. So what? I'm just curious. Reading through that, how did that strike you?
I think he handled it a good way.
Okay.
I guess the best way you could.
Okay. I mean, it's just
I don't
interesting.
know,
to me.
it's hard, I guess, to really find out who's really whose son.
Well, I think
But,
I think see when reading the Bible, I think the implication is like you know that Solomon he's got all this wisdom from God.
right.
So so the implication then, it might not say this outright, but again, you see this a lot in the Bible. The implication is that the decision that he's going to make is going to be the right decision.
Okay. Yeah.
Now later on down the line, it's going to have there are going to be other implications
Right.
that decisions he's making are not the right decision. But here it's like, okay, so he asked for wisdom from God, and now it's on display, right? So now we get a chance to display it, right?
Yeah.
And so these two prostitutes have children,
Right.
and they sleep with their infant children, and one of them dies, right? And the one whose child dies switches the children in the night, and they come to Solomon and say, they both claim that this is their child.
Right.
And Solomon's answer is, well, fine, we'll just cut the living child in half, and then you each can have a half, and we're you're
Like
good to go.
Episode
Problem
of
solved.
Maury
Right?
Povich.
Yeah, very dark too.
Right.
And so you see the wisdom of not just his knowing how to create this massive building project,
Right.
or having his people in the right places to govern this united monarchy, but also these two. It's interesting. They're two prostitutes,
Right.
that get an audience with the king.
Yeah.
That
is true.
we probably wouldn't think but that's part of his job. That's what
Yeah.
he does.
Yeah.
That's and the fact that he can kind of tap into also human nature.
Right.
That's a part of his wisdom,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
which I think is pretty impressive.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, I just thought it's kind of a notable.
Yeah. And then that's kind of like goes back to the judges of Israel too.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that's kind of how he plays, like the role that he kind of played in that moment.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I never think about that. Yeah, the judges in Israel were actually trying cases,
Right.
and so now they don't have a judge,
Yeah.
right? So he is now the judge. So now he is not only the king. Then is not only the kind of political executive, using really modern terms here,
Right.
but he is part of that. Is he's also the judicial system.
Right.
Because the Israelites had a very, very complex judicial system. That is, basically Exodus to Deuteronomy, as you see the judicial system, right?
Yeah.
On display there.
Yeah.
So Moses being the first high court of Israel,
Yeah.
first judge, and then he's got his under judges after Jethro comes and tells him to do that. And so yeah, he is the judicial system. He's the judicial and the executive branch, and,
Right.
and frankly, he's also the legislative
Right.
branch. I mean, he's everything here. And so what's going to appear then over the course of First and Second Kings is we'll see the king arise. There's still a prophet,
Okay.
and there's going to be a high priest,
Okay.
and and they are very active politically and spiritually, all three of them, and play very different roles.
Okay.
And what's going to happen is you're going to see the high priest and the king are both going to be situated in Jerusalem, because that's where the palace and the temple are going to be.
Right.
Okay. And then they are really kind of joined forces. And then there's going to be the prophet who's going to be, so they're going to hold what we call traditional authority, and the prophet is going to have what we call charismatic authority, where he doesn't necessarily have a kind of a role in the centralized governing,
Yeah.
like the priest and the king will, because the priest is going to be really important for government too here in this theocracy. But the prophet is going to be the guy people actually listen to.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they're going to go head to head,
Yeah.
especially as the kings and the priests turn away from God and get their own prophets,
You're right.
to tell them what they want to hear, like political pundits, basically.
Right. Yeah.
It's often gonna be the prophet versus the priest and the king.
Okay.
And which is interesting. And this is kind of the role that you'll see Isaiah fill,
Yeah.
and Amos and a lot of these other guys are gonna fill this same role.
Okay.
So interesting stuff ahead.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
bet. I'm excited.
Yeah, cool. Well, you got anything else? Or
That's all I had for today.
all right. Well, thanks for your questions. It's
Okay.
always fun to talk, and
Of course.
yeah, and thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.
And as we continue through First and Second Kings.